Okay, so in the final substrand of this core strand was identifying and sharing successful practice. And this is a really key element to this notion of excellence in practice, isn't it? So how do we identify it and how do we ensure that it's shared? So again, as a quick recap, some of the things, if you've engaged with the PLP already, it posed questions like, how do we define successful practice? How do we measure it? How do we evaluate the success of the additional learning needs coordinator function? Activity 14, you were asked to identify and evaluate how successful practice is in relation to the ALN function. And then in activity 15, you were asked to think about a specific intervention and consider how successful has this intervention been. And then mechanisms of activity 16, that was the last part of this section, was thinking about the mechanisms for sharing. What are the challenges to sharing successful practice? So we know a key role of the LNCO is about monitoring, measuring, and ensuring successful practice is in place in our settings. And from an academic perspective, when we're writing our assignments, one of the things that we need to think about is, what do we actually mean by successful practice or best practice, effective practice, excellence in practice? Are they all the same thing? What does that actually mean, and how is that coming through in the literature? And made a note here about the fact that inclusive practice in the UK is more commonly kind of framed now as being high quality teaching for everybody, as opposed to focusing in on something different to an additional for the individual. And that's part of that classic Florian and Black Hawkins inclusive pedagogy model, where the focus is about extending what is ordinarily available for everybody, so that nobody is singled out. In that last thematic report by Estem, they give an overview of what they consider inclusive practice to include all of these elements, good quality teaching and learning opportunities, sharing information about pupils with needs, high and realistic expectations, research-informed practice, thinking about our grouping arrangements, focusing on scaffolding and chunking, thinking about our use of questioning and giving small step instructions, the resources we use, the feedback we give, supporting learning and with interventions and modelling conversations to our learners. So there's so much going on in terms of what good quality practice looks like. And this model from Sadwrn 2017 is about knowledge management. It's about the focus on how do we get the right knowledge to the right people at the right time. And so this Sadwrn's work was included in the PLP pre-reading. So I've just kind of highlighted it here for that reminder. In that it's about how do we identify the people that hold the knowledge, that have the information. How do we gather that and store that, and how do we share it and then facilitate its use out in practice? And the work of Booth 2019 highlights that what is effective in one setting it's very context specific often, and it doesn't just automatically translate. So it can't be, and by setting, we're also talking classroom to classroom, isn't it? Learner to learner. So what works for one doesn't necessarily automatically just simply translate to another. There's more reflection involved in that. There's more needed. Okay. That said, we're going to have a shortened version of this final discussion in breakout rooms. We're asking you to think about what types of evidence you're gathering. Now, you've done that in previous modules with something we've already reflected on. So one of the things I want you to really focus in on this activity, because we're going to have a more kind of limited window to do this, is what are your mechanisms for sharing effective practice with others? And how could you develop the sharing of good practice further in your setting? So that's the bit I want you to really, really focus on, the sharing of practice. Okay, I'm going to stop recording, send you off into your breakout.